I'm Candace Salima, and welcome to Turning the Tide. I am so thrilled today to have Boyd Matheson of Trillium Strategies joining us. The reason that is because he is a Fortune 500 branding and strategist, and we are going to talk about America and the 2012 presidential candidates, so it is going to be fabulous. Boyd, welcome to Turning the Tide. Okay, so go ahead and share with us who you are and what you do.
I spend most of my time working with individuals, organizations, really helping them from a strategy standpoint, helping them to understand their story, their message, and how they can best convey that to their customers, to their clients, to the public in general. And a big part of that is really helping them to recognize that they do have a story to tell, and how they tell that story really matters. So often companies and even individuals, we get so lost in the details of the day. I often describe it as playing checkers. We kind of go day to day, crisis to crisis, event to event, project to project. And if you want to be successful in any area of life or business or politics, you've got to become a chess player. You've got to be strategic. You've got to look at the whole board, look at all your options, deploy all the resources, and tap into all of the connections out there, and use other people's talents as well to really maximize. So really try to go in and get people to look at who they are and what they do from a different standpoint, and then create a strategic plan to get that message out there to help create a real movement in whatever they're doing. And that leads to some real long-term success and really high impact.
It really does, and I have watched you work for a while now. I met you when you were working on the Mike Lee campaign, Senator Lee's campaign, and I watched you work, and you work magic, my friend.
You're very kind, and obviously with Senator Lee, he had a message that just rang true, and it was exciting to watch that transform from an idea and a set of core principles that Senator Lee is all about, and watching that become a movement, watching people feel like they became part of an extraordinary story that not only impacted a lot of people here in the state of Utah, but across the country as well.
Yeah, it was exciting, and it's actually been exciting to continue watching him working there in Washington, D.C., and seeing him keeping the promises that he made to us as he spoke up and down the state. Anyway, let's talk about branding the conservative message. Now, we talked about this before, you and I, but this is going to lead into us breaking down each presidential candidate. So I want you to give us a kind of a synopsis of what that means politically and how we can use it to turn America back around.
Absolutely. The interesting thing is I heard a quote the other day. It was actually an old Neil Maxwell quote that said, "What happens in the voting booth is democratic. What shapes and forms the opinions that lead to that decision have become increasingly aristocratic." In other words, there's a very small number of influential and highly paid people who are really driving, forming, shaping, and solidifying public opinion long before votes are cast in any kind of race or any kind of political issue of the day. And unfortunately, the left has done a far superior job of doing that. They're shaping and framing the debate. They're solidifying public opinion, often long before the conservatives are ever even firing a shot or getting an initial message out. So that becomes a distressor for me because while we look at the country as a whole, most people agree with the core principles and the core issues that we have to deal with. Everything from reducing the debt to getting rid of deficit spending to shrinking the size of government and its reach and influence in our lives. Most Americans, over 75%, agree that those are the core issues, along with getting the economy going and jobs. And yet, the framing of that debate has not been done very well. And so learning how to do that, learning how to be strategic, how to deploy all the forces, and to have the right story and message, I think is more important today than it's ever been.
I have to agree with you, and I am watching what's going on, what began in New York City with the Occupy Wall Street nonsense. And I've watched it spread across the nation, and people are comparing it to the Tea Party movement, and I find myself heartily offended by that on many levels. I read their 99 declaration, and it is horrific. And I did not think it would make its way out of New York City, but it literally is spreading. and the violence that is associated with it, the immorality, the arrests, the everything that's going on. Tell me what kind of message is coming out of the Occupy Wall Street. I know what message I'm getting, that there are a bunch of knuckleheads who are too lazy to go to work, but you're a professional. You tell me what you think.
they're professional knuckleheads, is what you're saying. No,
yes.
It's an interesting thing. I think on one hand they've captured part of the mood and the frustration. Unfortunately, they're focusing on things that are just so far out of the mainstream in terms of what this country is all about. It's been interesting to watch the media coverage, and non-coverage is often just as important as the coverage in terms of what's really going on. To compare and contrast it with the Tea Party is a pretty big stretch in my book. But again, they have captured, the interesting thing is they've captured the anger element, but Americans don't stay angry very long. It's not in our nature. We're positive, we're optimistic, and we're solution-oriented. And they don't seem to have any of that. They just want to, stand there and scream at the divide as if that will bring it together, and it simply doesn't. So while they have some traction in terms of a very small percentage of the population and people who don't, who are just going to sit there and scream that they don't have jobs and that it's everyone else's fault, I don't think it's a sustainable process simply because it's not human nature. It's moving forward. It's interesting. I think I may have a great quote by Arch Madsen, who was the CEO over at Bonneville Communication, and he said, "At this moment, the most fierce and destructive ideological war in all human history is being fought and is escalating hourly. We're waging it with the sharpest and most powerful communication weapons ever produced." And then he goes on to say that the scary thing is that both sides are granted access to the same powerful weapons. Television, magazines, books, movies, the internet, they're all available for both sides to spread their respective message. And so to me, we can do the same thing. We can sit there and scream at the divide that there's a liberal media bias and all of those things, but to me, that doesn't cut it either. I think we've missed opportunities in the past. I think we've allowed the conservative constitutional message to be labeled as boring and useless and impractical, mostly because of the way it's been communicated. It hasn't been strategic. It hasn't been powerful. It hasn't been served up and delivered in a way that the average person can say, yes, I get that. It rings true, and I am part of that great American story.
How do we get a message out there, a brand that Americans can get behind that is not involved with forgive all my student loans and take all the money from the wealthy people and give it to me? How do we get away from that message to the real message, the one that will really, really restore America and put her back on that path to greatness?
Yeah, I think most Americans and most people around the world recognize that there is no easy path. I think many have tried to frame it as this awful austerity plan. But to me, that's just a discipline plan. And that's how it needs to be framed. Americans in particular love to be challenged. Americans love to do hard things. If you look at the greatest generation, they thrived. They did seemingly impossible things simply because they were challenged to do them. And instead, we have an administration and a White House that is pandering to the lowest common denominator of free, easy, nanny state types of programs and principles. And again, that's why I think during this next election cycle, it is going to be those people who say, you know what, there are hard choices to make, but those choices are made easier when they're made on principle. And as you look at the founding principles of this country, they are those things of hard work, determination, self-reliance, serving, working others. It was interesting to hear Senator Lieberman, who was here in Utah yesterday, both at the University of Utah and at BYU, talking about America being the ultimate faith-based initiative. And those principles ring through. They ring
yes, they
through.
Do.
So I think those are some of the keys in terms of our messaging, and then how we just live our lives is the greatest influence in terms of turning the tide and really getting people to recognize that, yeah, there are a core set of values and principles that this country is about. And as we live those, and as we have the discipline, and as we're challenged and led, which is clearly not happening in Washington right now, we have to be challenged and led. People will rise up and do it. It's in our nature, and I think it's part of our destiny.
I happen to agree with you. I'm afraid that the people who are occupying Wall Street are tilting at windmills and muddying the true message that needs to be out there to America, which is simply this. As you said, we are a people who have always stood up and fought that good fight and come out the winner because we don't give up. And we need to get that core value of being an American instilled into every American again, because I feel like it's been cut out of them. And maybe only 39 million of the 250, 300 million who live here even have it anymore.
Yeah, and I think there's a desensitization that's going on, and as you said rightly, Candace, there's a muddying of the water. But I also think that in this country there's a feeling right now of, I actually like to call it a divine discontent, that people are discontent, and not necessarily in an angry Occupy Wall Street kind of way. But I think people are beginning to sense that, you know what, we've gotten away from what made us great. And people want to feel good about who they are. They want to feel good about being an American. They don't want someone to be an apologist for who we are and what we represent. You look at all the good that this country has done and continues to do, not just in terms of international things, but in terms of innovation and wellness and a host of other things. This country does good, and that's a message that I think we're sadly lacking, and we're not celebrating the fact that we do make a difference in the world, and that there are pockets of the world that don't like us or that would love to see us fail, we have the opportunity to become one of the few societies in history to outlive their own success. Not many have done it. In fact, I don't know that any have really done it well. You can go back to the ancient civilizations, the Roman Empire, the British, and on through the ages, and they often achieve a level of greatness, and they do some extraordinary things, but then they get comfortable. They rest on their laurels a little bit. They kind of start going to the minimum standard. They start looking for the easy way. And before you know it, they get wiped out by another civilization that's hungry, that's going after it, that's pursuing excellence and those things. And so we have a rare opportunity. This great experiment of America is really at a tipping point in terms of which direction will we go. Will we allow ourselves to get comfortable and slide into those areas where we just can't sustain it, because we know it's impossible to sustain the kind of spending and programs that are going on, none of which are congruent with who we are as a country. And so I think that's why there's such a critical need for people to stand up, to speak out, to stand alone if necessary, to talk about the principles and the values that will lead us back to greatness. I still believe that talking about principles has a greater impact on changing behavior than talking about behavior. And it doesn't matter whether it's about drugs and alcohol or local things that are going on in terms of crime. It's the principles that drive that. And if you're just dealing with behavior all the time, you'll need a whole lot of police officers. You'll need a whole lot of penitentiaries and places to put people because their behavior doesn't match. But when you drive the principles, the founding principles of this country, then behavior becomes a natural byproduct, and it's actually sustainable over time.
And that's good to hear, because we have got to get back to those core values and principles that made America great, as you said. And it is not something that can continue to be pushed aside. I believe that Barack Obama did a lot of damage when he went on his apology world tour and then kept apologizing and kept talking about how awful America was and kept talking about the man's insane. And then I've watched him go on to do everything that he castigated while he was a senator and a candidate. He just is like, oh, hey, that looks good now that I'm president.
Yeah. When you're being led by focus groups and pollsters and consultants, it is very hard to stay true to the principles that made this country great.
Yeah, it's true. And then, add to the fact that the man has an entirely different political philosophy than most of the nation, then we've got trouble. And that brings us to the 2012 presidential campaign. Now, Boyd, when we come back from the break, I want to break them down one by one, beginning with the Republicans and ending with Barack Obama. You can, with the Republicans, give them ideas if you want to improve, but don't do so with Barack Obama, because I don't want to give that man any good ideas.
Okay, that's fair. That's a good way to frame it.
Yeah, that's what I think. And so when we come back from the break, people, Boyd and I are going to go one by one through all the Republican candidates and then Barack Obama, and then I'm going to put Boyd on the spot, and I'm going to match up these candidates, each one with Barack Obama, and Boyd's going to tell us which one he thinks is going to win based on their messaging and branding.
That's a deal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a break, and we will be back.